Hello, I'm Dorothy Staley. I'm the author of a novel called Bear Woman Rising, and I'm awfully glad to be participating in the Sunshine State Book Festival this year for 2021. I'm glad to be a part of this new experiment and all of the challenges that we're all dealing with. So thank you ahead of time for inviting me. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I lived and worked in the Arctic for 5 years at a Naval Arctic Research Lab. And while there, I met a lot of scientists, got to know them, interviewed them, went out on their work sites with them. And I was inspired by some of the women scientists that came to the Arctic. Some of them were affiliated with the University of Alaska. Some of them came from other countries, Sweden, for example. And they faced challenges specific to women at that time. One of them, unrelated to her work at the laboratory or her teaching at the University of Alaska, this is in the 1970s, and she wanted to buy a house in Fairbanks. And because she was a woman, she could not get a mortgage for a house. And this was in 1969. So that was a challenge that professional women faced in those days. My one character is sort of a combination of all these women scientists that I worked with at the lab, and her name is Jessie. She is a scientist, she's data-driven, she's very factual, she's a researcher. My other female character is very different. They are polar opposites, these two women. Her name is Kara, and she's married to a gold miner, and they live in the remote area of Alaska. They live in a cabin. His mine is about 10 miles away from the cabin, so she is alone for a good part of the time in the bush, the Alaskan bush. She has a 2-year-old. She's a mother. She's a songwriter, a singer. She thinks with her heart. She feels things rather than analyzes them. These two women, Kara, the songwriter, and Jessie, the scientist, meet in a roadhouse in Yukon Territory and form a friendship. Within 3 days, they form a very endurable friendship, and it helps to carry them through the rest of their lives. Jessie goes south to Washington, D.C. She's an unwed mother. She faces challenges of career and motherhood. Kara goes north back into the wilderness with her 2-year-old to try to create a songwriting career and get through the winter in a very remote area. I'd like to read you an excerpt from the book, and this one involves Jessie when she arrives at the Arctic Research Camp in the Arctic of Alaska. Chapter 3, June 7th, 1969, Nuvik, Alaska. Jessie shifted her backpack higher onto her shoulders. From the top of the portable airplane steps, she had a good view of the village. Beyond the iron-sided terminal, small frame houses fanned out in a sea of tundra grass, rooftops sporting caribou antlers, sides shored up with slabs of whale meat. A sprinkling of newer homes perched on pilings teetered above their elders like kids on stilts. And here and there along dirt streets, dog teams stretched out their tethers, and snow machines squatted, nose in for the summer. Beyond the village, the Chukchi Sea sparkled relentlessly in the bright sun. Near the bottom of the stairs, tourists boarded a waiting top-of-the-world airlines bus with the biggest tires Jessie had ever seen. A frail old man struggled up the first high step, then a wind gust sent dust and debris flying. Jessie grabbed the railing, shielded her eyes, and scanned the dark water all the way to the horizon, a jagged white line against the sky. The polar ice cap, literally the top of the world. She shook her hair free and grinned. On the tarmac, Ben Ningiak watched the passengers disembark. Standing legs apart in the spongy gravel, he let the wind off the ocean support his back. Ben lifted the name printed on cardboard to his chest and turned his attention to the open door of the airplane. Someone in a khaki windbreaker had just emerged. That's him, Ben thought, as the newcomer shifted his backpack, shielded his eyes, and gazed over the rooftops of the village toward the ocean. That man, little bit like a snowy owl, wants to see everything from a high place. Ben thought as the newcomer shook her long hair free and smiled. Surprised, Ben sucked in his breath. He watched her walk quickly down the steps, taking in everything as she went. This girl seemed glad to be here. Maybe this one would stay. Ben Ningiak provides an interesting thread through the story. He's a village wise man, a storyteller, and he befriends Jessie, and his wisdom helps her over some very difficult times as she journeys south to recreate her career in the Washington, D.C. area, a very different environment than the Arctic. I lived in the Arctic 5 years, and we left in 1976, but it never left me. I never forgot a girl I met in a laundromat in Yukon Territory, a young mother with a toddler who was going back into the wilderness with her husband because he mined for gold. I watched them drive away at the end of our day of doing our laundry, and she was doing her laundry for the entire winter, and I thought, she's not going to make it. I really feared for this young woman going back into the wilderness. So that inspired me to write a story about the scientist, the young female scientist, and the dreamer, the young songwriter, and how these two lives intertwine importantly in the 1970s. I really appreciate being able to share my story with all of you, and I'm glad that we're participating even at a distance. So thank you very much for inviting me to join this wonderful and inventive book festival for 2021. Thank you. Goodbye.